Hi, my name's Reid and I am doing this short video for the POV project. So my name's Reid, I work for the Crib Social Inclusion Project, and within that project we work with young people and have done so for the last 20 years. It's our anniversary next year. So we have great informed insight into young people, especially in the Hackney Borough, and how they're affected by gang crime and youth culture in general. We are aware at the Crib that there has been an increase in youth violence within the Hackney Borough. When I say an increase, I think it's more an increase on the knowledge of those in the wider field. So we are aware at the Crib that there has been issues such as we have now and dating back to 2008, where we did have the same form of statistics in regards to youth violence. It's just that before we didn't have the media platform that we have now, so everybody is a bit more informed, so it can seem like it's heightened and the levels are very, very high. Personally, I feel that this is because the media is displaying it in that way, so this therefore causes more fears and anxieties amongst young people and parents, especially parents, because parents now feel that their children are more at risk. So children's risk level have gone up because of social media and so on and so forth. So we don't no longer have, so for example, if you're being bullied or if somebody is trying to groom you into the involvement in gangs, previously you would maybe be approached in the street and that would be it. Whereas now that we have social media, it's very easy for people to access you online. So what would be a bullying platform outside of the house now comes into the home, because more and more people are able to access you via Snapchat, Instagram and other platforms that allow that continued communication during the night and the day. In Hackney, personally, I feel, well, and the statistics that we have here at the Crib do show that these gangs are not as they used to be. So previously you would have very big gangs, so gangs in certain parts of the borough that controlled a vast number of the activity that was going on. What we now have, we don't have those huge influential gangs. We now have small pockets of gangs. So there are less gangs, but the smaller pockets of gangs that we have now see young people controlling the platform of these gangs. Whereas previously it was, this sounds quite weird, but it was more organized. So you would have an older person that was controlling the behavior of the younger people. We have that still now in gangs, but the difference is that, for example, if you have an older person that has been arrested, that older person will then pass on a gang's phone line, so a drugs line, that would then be passed down to a young person who doesn't have so much control and status. This person then needs to up the level of their control and status. The only way for those young people to up their level of control is to be more aggressive and more violent. So this is why, personally, we feel that we're seeing an increase in violence. Also, I feel that due to the media displaying this fear factor, so we are fear mongering. The more something goes out on social media, the more anxious parents become, because we are seeing that young people are carrying more knives and so on and so forth. So parents become more anxious, but at the same time as parents becoming more anxious, what happens is the young people become more anxious. This is where the risk lies, because if you are promoting, which I feel the media are doing, they are promoting the fact that young people are carrying knives. This puts fear into those young people, who then, you may have a young person who would never have dreamed of carrying a knife, is now in fear. So if the media is saying, for example, that in the local borough of Hackney, we have an increase of 15% of young people carrying knives. This then puts the fear in young people that do not carry knives. Well, if there's a 15% increase, this means that I am at more risk of being injured by a knife or suffering a fatality. So for that young person, they will then start to carry a knife. So these are the kind of things I think that we need to be looking at. And as parents, it's really important that if your child is seeing this information on the media, that we as parents are being more informative of the information that they are receiving. So if you are aware that your child is worried about something like this, we need to be having these conversations with our children. I am a true believer of early intervention, so prevention. We at the crib have done numerous things around intervention, and then we realise that intervention works. I'm not saying it doesn't. However, if you are working with 10 young people on an intervention basis, the statistics of the amount of young people that you will be able to help on a long-term basis is reduced. Whereas if you are working on a prevention method, so you're working with a young person at the early stages, so as soon as it is highlighted, usually in primary school, it will be highlighted that a young person finds it very difficult to accept consequence to their own actions. This is when you need to start working with the young person. However, like I said, working with the young person isn't always key. You have to work with the parent. The child will stay in school for most of the day. However, the parent is responsible for the rest of the time. So the parent needs to be informed. And I feel that by doing prevention measures like the parents' voice sessions that we do, we are able to give the parent the tools and equip them with the safeguarding methods that they can use within the home. So this can be around social media, making them aware. You know, we've done a lot of stuff on social media. I mean, not just us here at the crib or at Parents' Voice, but just in general, we do a lot around social media and sexual exploitation and grooming and stuff like that. The same thing happens with gangs, and this is stuff that parents need to know. That it's all fair and good our children go to school at age 11 and we give them an Oyster card. So you get your Oyster card. Here you go, guys. The world is your oyster. Well, actually, the world isn't your oyster. You just have an Oyster card. I mean, let's be honest, the world isn't your oyster until you start making and showing that you are responsible to be able to do things. So it's about parents being mindful that although we are now allowing our children to travel to school, that it's really important we still maintain a boundary. Because if we allow our children to travel to school on their own, this doesn't mean that they're grown-ups. This doesn't mean that they're not anxious. This doesn't mean that they don't have their own fears. A number of children, I mean, I know from my own experience with having a child, that when you ask them, so how do you feel about getting, they will just say that they're fine. Fine isn't good enough. It's really important that if we're speaking to our children say that they are fine, that we define what that actually means. Because as an adult, you know that if somebody says they're fine, that could mean that they're having quite a bad time. Because if you're having a great time, you won't say I'm fine. You will say, oh, things are great. Whereas if you say that you're fine, it usually means that things are kind of okay, or there's a lot of stuff going on that you don't really want to discuss. So it's important as a prevention measure that we are opening up this pathway of conversation for our children to openly speak to us without judgment. I say it like that because as a parent, I know it's really difficult. You know, your children will tell you things and automatically you'll jump. Oh, you know, well, Bob was misbehaving in school. And our reaction is, oh gosh, you know, well, I don't really think that Bob's the right person to be around. Well, actually, sometimes our children do need to learn those lessons. But maybe what we need to do as parents is think about how we say that about Bob, for example. So if we feel that a particular child is a bad influence, if you tell a child not to be around that child, the likeliness is, I mean, come on guys, we were all teenagers, the likeliness is you're going to see Bob behind your parents' back. So if you open that conversation to talk about him and ask, well, what have you and Bob got in common? You know, why is it that you've decided to, not why have you decided to hang about Bob, but what have you got in common with Bob? And if your child says, oh, well, what it is, you know, well, I make Bob laugh, or Bob likes me to kind of just go around with him, you need to make sure that our children know that friendships are about gaining things and learning things from other people. Yeah, it's not about learning negative things. I feel that very often what happens is the media picks up on a story. So, for example, there has been a fatality in an area. The media will pick up on that. Then they will research information on that area on previous violent crimes. Now, what happens is they then sensationalize it because, I mean, let's be honest. a good story has to have a lot of fear mongering in it, because if it's got that in it, then it kind of glamorizes or sensationalizes what's going on. I'm not saying this isn't going on, it's going on. I'm saying it's not as bad as it seems, in the sense that yes, we are having fatalities, yes, we are having young people that get involved in gangs, but we also have groups of young people that spend a lot of time around each other, engaging in positive activities, and this is something that the media doesn't pick up on. We are just picking up on the negativities of young people. This then puts fear into young people. It starts labeling young people. If you label a young person, then you create a self-fulfilling prophecy. This for me is very worrying. It then puts fear into the parent, because if the parent sees that this is an increase, like I said about the knife crime, if parents see gangs as an increase and the grooming is an increase, then parents become more scared. And again, this anxiety will fall on their children. So having those conversations are very, very important. My advice for most parents, usually when dealing in the setting that I do, so I would deliver a number of sessions in the Hackney Borough for parents to understand boundaries, for example, to have a better understanding of gangs, the impact of gangs, why children are groomed, what type of children are groomed, and this is the kind of stuff that parents need to know. So for example, children are groomed usually because they are seen as vulnerable. This does not mean that if you have a child who is more quiet, that child is more likely to be targeted for a gang membership. It just means that you need to make sure you're informing your children about this information and keeping an eye on them more. I mean, if you have a child, if you come home from work, I know that we all need a break. You know, we're living in a society where everybody works. You know, we all work. We don't have the luxury of a parent staying at home. And most times, if a parent is at home, a parent is still doing some form of a shift, especially in more deprived areas, because we now have parents that may work a 16-hour week so that they can pick up the children. Now, as a parent myself, I know that this can be quite tiring. So coming home and allowing your children to have the luxury of going out. So I know a large number of parents whose children come home, they'll be straight out the door. It is our responsibility as parents to ensure that we are monitoring their homework. It's shown in numerous research papers that if we are not paying attention and monitoring our children's homework and paying attention and showing an interest in education, showing an interest in friendships, that our children will gradually move away from us. This will happen during adolescence. However, this will happen even more if we are allowing our children to make more decisions. Yes, I totally understand that we live in a society where children are in a different way making decisions for themselves. They gain respect, they want respect. But if you ask me, if the only way to gain respect, to have respect from a parent is to gain it, the only way to have trust from a parent is to gain it. These are the kind of things that we need to be telling our children. When our children talk about privacy, we totally understand children should have privacy. However, if a child is living in your house under your roof, how much privacy should they really have? They aren't paying any bills. They certainly don't pay the phone bill. So I've had a lot of parents that have come to me and said, well, I don't really monitor my child's phone. I don't go in their room so much because they're a teenager now and I feel bad doing that, you know, because it's an invasion of their privacy. My response to that would be, they're not entitled to privacy, not full privacy. We have to be serious about the levels of trust and privacy we give to our children and the levels of respect. As I said, this is all gained. If we are allowing our children to make the decision to come home from school and go straight out and hang out in the streets and do their own thing and make the decisions on when they do their homework and if they do their homework, and the fact that they may decide that we say that they have to be in at 8 o'clock, they decide, well, 8 o'clock's not the right time. We need to be mindful of this. I think in creating boundaries, I often speak to parents about kind of picking the right battles, because if If we focus on all the battles with our children, it's very, very difficult. It can be difficult for us as parents, and it can be an absolute nightmare for your child, where your child will then back off and stop giving you information about who their friends are and so on and so forth, because we are on them all the time. So yes, we don't want to be on them all the time, but we need to let them know that we do care, we are here, and we will listen. So this is making sure that we are creating the right boundaries. So for example, if a child is coming in late, like I suggested about the time, if a child is coming in late and every day they're coming in at 9 o'clock when you've set the time scale as 8:30, having a conversation with the child instead of screaming and shouting when the child comes into the room, because we know as adults, if somebody shouts, nobody listens. This goes the same for children. If you are constantly shouting at your child, they're not going to listen to what you've got to say.